Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. Today on Todos Santos, we're going to start solving a little bit of a problem that we have in the city, which is that our city's utilities are a little weirdly set up. Actually, these are backwards. I don't know why I did that. But we're going to deal with that today by making a sewage treatment plant, wastewater treatment plant, whatever you want to call it. And hopefully the result is going to be that we not only have the numbers taken care of, I mean, this current pit solution that we have takes care of the numbers just fine, but also have what I like to call an aesthetically functional solution. So it not only takes care of the numbers side of things, it also looks like it functions. So you have, well, let's just fill this area in and get started, and I'll just show you. I got really interested in this sort of utility and how this stuff works in cities because I really didn't know that much before I decided to do this build. So I did quite a bit of research. Obviously, I'm no expert or anything, but I'll try to explain it as best I can, at least explain my understanding of it. And if you don't want to trust the explanation by some random dude on YouTube, which is probably a good move on your part, I'll link some more reputable sources down in the description, which I used for my research. So the first piece of information or distinction that I hadn't really thought of is the difference between water purification for drinking water or, industrial uses or whatever, and sewage treatment. Now, we'll get into the former in a couple episodes, but for this episode, obviously, we're just dealing with all the wastewater. So, from toilets, showers, sinks, industry, whatever goes into the sewer, it ends up here for the most part. And of course, you need to filter out all the crap, literal and otherwise, that's in there. So there are a few different steps to take care of that. And of course, there are different ways to do it, but I tried to go with something that was fairly universal. And I also tried to do it in a way that was, fun to build and aesthetically somewhat interesting. So the first couple of steps are, well, you saw that building that I placed down. It's on the top left of the screen right now. You can see a little corner of it. That's meant to represent the screening facility, which is basically just a big screen or grill that you lower down into the water to filter out any large objects that aren't really going to be taken care of in the rest of the processes. Next is something we haven't quite built yet, which is the grit chamber or grit channel. Not sure exactly what it's called. Basically, it moves water through a channel at a certain rate of flow to promote grit falling out of the water, I guess, and down to the bottom. And then it's pumped into these things, which are called clarifiers. These are pretty familiar, probably if you've looked on the workshop for assets for this kind of build. Basically, you just send the water into there, give it a certain amount of time, and things settle out to the bottom. And then there's like a rotating scraper that scrapes all that stuff up. And then all that stuff, I think it's called sludge is what that's called. It seems like a fitting name. Is eventually put onto trucks and you have to send that off to the landfill. And the step after that is these rectangular things. These are aeration basins. So you basically bubble air into the water, I guess. And that promotes biological activity that's going to then break down a bunch of stuff that's in the water. There's some secondary clarifiers there. Those are smaller. By the way, the bigger ones that I did, I had to turn into POs and adjust them and add some decals and props manually because I just thought they looked a little bit small as they were. But for the secondary clarifiers, the smaller ones, I just left them as they were just to get a little variation in the size and shape of these things. Then the last couple steps are that I put down another building there, the L-shaped one. That's where you add in some chlorine, potentially other chemicals as well. And then it goes out to the pump, which we're just shooting all that water out into the river, which then goes kind of ironically over to the lagoon that we used sewage to change its color a few episodes ago. Check out episode 57 if that sounds interesting and you haven't seen it yet. But I thought that was kind of funny that that's where the supposedly clean water ends up. We also have an administration building, of course. Got to put a couple of those office blocks in there because it's just a unique building as is. I also wanted to put down some industrial blocks as well, clipped into some of these buildings, just to simulate that there are a few jobs here and also to get some traffic coming and going. And to make this fully functional, we're going to add a few garbage blocks as well. That'll send out some garbage trucks, which of course you would expect because you have lots of solid waste coming out of all these processes that need to go to the landfill. So I figured it would just be, even though in real life the trucks wouldn't originate here, you would get them coming and going all the time. So by doing that, we get to basically have that happening, which is kind of what I mean when I say aesthetically functional. Of course, I also put down some of these water treatment blocks, and that way we can actually take care of the number side of things. And now that we've done that, we can go ahead and delete all these old treatment plants. Sorry I had to get a bit breathless there going through all those steps and everything. This is one downside to doing this time-lapse format is that it's just somewhat hard to keep up with the time-lapse sometimes. Yeah, but now we've taken care of the functionality, so it's time to go on to my favorite part, which is the aesthetics of it. So for industrial builds, I like to use these plain roundabout roads that, I've talked about them multiple times in the series before. They're awesome, especially for this sort of build where you don't necessarily want to have the road like sunken down because you don't really need sidewalks. I just think it has a nice plain industrial look. And they blend really well when you increase the corner offset with node controller to get these nice smooth curves, just be a little nicer on all your truck drivers. And the way I've been trying to arrange these in this build and some other industrial builds that we're going to do pretty soon is leaving space in between them and whatever they're servicing, if that makes any sense. So we have these kind of, you can think of like each facility, so the aeration basins or the clarifiers is like taking up their own block and just leaving almost these like lawns around them of just plain grass. And it's a little bland looking up close, but when you look at it from a distance and when you look at these things on Google Maps, they tend to not be too cramped. I found that my inclination is usually to squish all these buildings together, and I think it's more satisfying and a bit more realistic to just give them a little bit of room to breathe. Anyway, there was this one last little facility that I hadn't built because I needed to custom make it. I didn't really have an asset ready to go for it. And this is the grit channel or grit facility, whatever it's called. I'm just using a couple sunken roads to lower the elevation because obviously we need an actual channel for the water to run through, and then some retaining walls for the walls. Now I completely forgot to record building this, which is really stupid. Sorry about that. Sometimes it happens. But basically, I just added another retaining wall, a smaller version in the center. I think I adjusted the ends with node controller. You can stretch it either to make it wider or skinnier. I think I made it skinnier in this case. And added some water props just to simulate that there's water down there. And then a couple of the animated seafoam buildings just to show that there's water passing through here because it is in the grit chamber, or grit facility. It is moving through at a certain rate. So I wanted to represent that and just really get that, like I said before, aesthetic functionality. So it's not just actually taking care of the problem, it's looking like it's taking care of the problem, which you don't always get with City Skylines builds. So I really wanted to put effort into doing that. And then I thought it would be interesting. It seems like there's usually some sort of walkway over this kind of facility. So I'm using these, I think they're from the rail yard pack that I used for the metro rail yard, like a lot of episodes ago. I don't remember how long ago. I just think it has a nice industrial look and it fits in fine here. And then I wanted to give them a reason to access the center here because it's kind of just a plain wall as it is. So why do they actually need to have these stairs going down there? I figured that there might be some random pipes for some reason. So they might need to go down there and access those for maintenance. These pipe props are from, I believe, the Pipeline Network asset. It comes with a bunch of props that basically like populate as you draw out the network, and I just find that those are also really good for plopping and doing this kind of detailing, because they just look really industrial, and they can kind of give you this like industrial greebling look, which I think is kind of cool. Now we got to clean up this area a little bit. Of course, the highway here is up on a causeway, and the sewage treatment plant is down in the lowlands, kind of, so there's a big elevation gap here. So I'm just using a retaining wall, some ploppable grass, and then blocking off the area from the highway with this nice concrete wall prop, just using IMT. Now the reason the sewage treatment plant is here is actually it kind of worked out this way. I didn't really intend this, but this is definitely the lowest part of the city. And these water treatment plants are usually at as low of an elevation as possible because then they don't have to spend as much time and energy and money pumping water up. So they just use the force of gravity to get water as far as it can go. And then they only use pumping when they absolutely have to. So it's kind of fortunate that this ended up being built here. And then another aspect of the location that I thought was kind of interesting is it's next to the kind of silly, unrealistic dam that we built in episode 57, which even though it's silly and unrealistic, I still think it's kind of cool. And you could imagine they would want to control the flow of water going to the water treatment plant, I suppose. So if there was flooding or something, or there was, heavy rainfall, they would be able to protect this important lowland infrastructure from all those problems just by, closing the floodgates. And there's plenty of room in the lake behind it, or the reservoir behind it, I guess you would call it. So then you wouldn't have to worry about flooding, which is generally a good thing to not have to worry about that. Just a couple more points of detailing to clean this area up a little bit. I always have these annoying textures at the edge of these parking lot roads when you get rid of the pavement, so I just have to cover those up with some blobbable grass. A little tedious, but I think it's worth it because it looks nice and clean once you're done doing that. Now this clarifier asset has rotating paddles, I believe they're called, built into it, which is pretty cool. But obviously when you turn them into a PO, it gets rid of that. So I had to add in my own, just using another one of these pipes from the industrial pipeline pack, and adding the self-rotation module from PO. It's not perfect, but it gets these things rotating, and they look relatively functional. So I think that's good enough for now. Just make sure they line up. I have to make a couple adjustments here and there because I think the point of rotation is not quite centered, which is fine. So I got the innards of this place taken care of. Don't worry, we're going to detail all this later on. But I just wanted to define the kind of outline of it. So we have a security gate here, just so you don't have random people going into the sewage treatment plant. Seems like maybe not a good idea. And then of course there's a fence that surrounds this whole thing as well for the same reason. So we're kind of at the edge of the city. So one interesting thing that allows us to do is to have some of these giant industrial buildings kind of outside of the industrial area. So in this case, we have a big warehouse, which we're going to kind of move around and adjust with PO because I didn't think it quite fit as it was with all the fences that are baked into the asset. So I have to get rid of those with PO and mirror it just so it fits into kind of the L shape that we have. But don't worry, we can still make it functional by using a couple of these warehouse blocks. And what I'm thinking is that this place is a supermarket warehouse, so like the main supermarket chain in the city, which we don't actually have any versions of. We'll have to build something like that somewhere in Todos Santos. But we're going to brand it as Pueblo, which is, I believe, an actual Puerto Rican supermarket chain. So that's kind of cool that worked out that way. I didn't actually know that when I did this build, if I'm being honest. Kind of makes sense that they would have a big warehouse somewhere in the city. And it's pretty much a straight shot to the port via the freeway from here, so I think it kind of makes sense that maybe it would be a little cheaper to have their warehouse out here instead of in the main industrial zone. And it kind of makes sense it's next to a big utility, so it's not really like a giant residential area or anything. So anyway, I thought for all those reasons, I thought this was a good place to have a warehouse. And I didn't just want to have this water treatment plant be out in the middle of nowhere. So there's going to be a little bit of development here. I wanted to have these trucks branded as well because that's something you see with big supermarkets. They have their own trucks instead of just having plain containers. So we just got to do that, and then we're going to get to the rest of the details for both the warehouse and the sewage treatment plant. We got these awesome grass assets. I think I have mentioned them before, maybe a couple episodes ago, and they just look so good, and they really bring these bare areas of grass to life. There are a couple problems though. One, it can be pretty tedious to fill in these smaller gaps because there's a prop version that matches the big ploppable building version, but it just can get kind of annoying to fill all this in. And second is that the ploppable version counts as a building. You may have seen my community post a few weeks ago where I pointed out that I hit the building limit in Todos Santos. And there are a lot of little things like that. It's kind of like death by 1,000 cuts, where I have several assets like the grass, breakwater rocks, park people generators, where, I have a few hundred of each of those put down, and that really adds up when you can only put down, 49,000 buildings or whatever it is. So I'm still kind of weighing whether it's worth doing that sort of grass detailing with these assets in particular, because they just, like I said, count toward the building limit, which is a pretty big problem because we're at the building limit and I'm not done with the series. We're definitely closing in on the end of the series. I think we'll probably get to 70 to 75 episodes. But I have managed to go through and turn some things into POs, delete other things, unsubscribe from certain assets, and I've freed up about 5,000 more buildings. So hopefully that should be enough to finish the series. I did a little bit of very, very rough math, and it seems to be just about the right amount. But it really depends on, the kind of builds we're going to do. And I think we'll be doing a lot of detailed stuff with PO and props, so it shouldn't be too big of a problem. But I did want to point out that some of these things we're doing just aren't sustainable for the rest of the series, so there might be some small changes here and there to the way we do some builds. And I should clarify that when I talk about being at the building limit, I'm recording quite far ahead of where we are in the series. So you're watching episode 61, and I hit the building limit recording episode 68, I think it was. So we're not quite at the building limit now, and I'll get more into detail on that once we get to that episode. But anyway, that was kind of a big rant based off of just plopping down a couple of pieces of grass. But I put down some trees, some desire paths where I thought employees might walk back and forth, and we got to detail up this river as well. So just some rocks right next to the outlet of the treatment plant, and more of these animated seafoam decals just to show that there's a little bit of roughness where the water's being pumped out. And I thought the whole area looked a little bare, so we just have some various industrial clutter. Some tanks that I imagine could hold some chemicals. I put down some pipes earlier just being delivered for whatever reason. Maybe they're expanding and they need to lay down some extra pipage. Adding a couple of surfaces here and there with some decals just to make it look a little bit more worn and realistic. Bollards to protect these things so trucks don't run into them and make them explode, I guess. And then we gotta name this place. So turn it into a district. And what the name I came up with is really stupid, but also it kind of made me laugh, so we're going to keep it. And it is the Planta Obras Públicas de Tratamiento de Aguas Residuales de Todos Santos. Sorry for my pronunciation. It's called POPTARTS, and the name translates to Public Works Wastewater Treatment Plant of Todos Santos. But now that we've got the name out of the way, there's a little bit more context to create for it. Sorry we're kind of jumping back and forth between these two areas, but we have another warehouse. I'm thinking maybe this is like the original warehouse for Pueblo in this area, and it has since been abandoned. They purchased the plot of land across the street and upgraded to a much bigger warehouse. So this one's just kind of sitting abandoned. There's a bunch of graffiti on it. There's a nice set of graffiti warehouses. I'll link those down in the description if you want to put these in your cities. And then I figured they would need to block it off, so there's a kind of broken down fence that was originally there, but then there are also some roadblocks blocking the driveway there. So we've got this place all nice and detailed up. We're pretty much done with this whole, at least this industrial part of the build, so we just got to do a little bit of lighting, light up this intersection, and just the main entrance road here, and then the rest of the lighting is going to be taken care of by lights that are attached to the buildings, which I normally like to do, especially in these kind of industrial builds. I like positioning them under awnings like this when I can, because I just think that looks really cool to have these pools of light coming out from underneath. Just looks a little bit more ambient and interesting. And buildings like these in particular that have lots of spaces and weird roofs and stuff like that, you can get some really cool, interesting glowing going on with these lights. So I just try to do that where I can. And now as I was lighting this up and lighting the sign, I thought it would be interesting to have like a sign right by the entrance as well, so people know what they're turning onto when they turn onto this road. So I was doing a very simple concrete wall, angle it a little bit with PO, because I think that looks nice, nice and cool and simple, but still a little bit stylish. And then some flowers, of course, and some bollards to protect the sign. Since, like I mentioned, we're pretty much at the edge of the city, or at least at the urbanized part of the city, I wanted to create a fairly low-density neighborhood that's kind of in the process of being developed and added onto, as we'll see. So I just have a very simple road network. There's a frontage road along the highway, which we're going to put some commercial and residential along. I'm trying to, like I said, keep the density fairly low. Compared to what I usually do, where I pack buildings together. And I'm also trying to make it so the road network is not like super connected. Like usually when we're building neighborhoods, It's a pretty continuous road network, but this is kind of more like separate subdivisions that have been built at separate times, so they're not like totally connected. Maybe eventually, as this neighborhood develops, they would be connected up into one larger road network, which would kind of explain some of the weird angles and weird combinations of blocks and stuff that you get in neighborhoods in real life. But for now, this is still kind of in the early stages of being developed. Not every plot of land has been sold and had a house built on it. And we're also going to add some natural areas beyond it that have not even been prepared for development yet. So we're just going to detail up this commercial strip, add some houses in the road network behind it, and then we're going to add a couple more things before we finish out the episode. And now over here we have a residencial, which is basically a public housing project as far as I understand. These buildings are a little taller than I would like, these Cuban buildings. They have the right look, but I would prefer like a maybe 2 or 3 story building. I think might be a little bit more accurate. I think there are some assets coming that will help out with that, but for now we're using these. I think they have the right look, so it's fine. I'm not too worried about having that, 1 or 2 extra floors worth of height. And then we got to fill in some of these gaps. Yeah, I'm trying to go sparse. I really didn't think this through. If this is a more recent development, they'd probably, there wouldn't be as many tall trees and they wouldn't be as tightly packed, but too late for that. I think, it still looks nice, so I'm not too worried about not completely having it fit in with the story that we're building for this neighborhood. Now this area behind it, this natural area, I have this little ditch running through it. I'm trying to integrate these various waterways as we move into the more rural and suburban areas. These are just areas that have been prepared to some degree for development. So they've rerouted streams where they need to, or they've added new streams. Maybe this is going to meet up with our agricultural area that we're going to build and serve as irrigation. But I'm just trying to show that there are various stages of the development of Todos Santos in these more suburban and rural kinds of areas. So we have this in the middle, we have the dense forest that they haven't even chopped down yet because it's just so dense, and they're going to develop the places that are easier to develop first, and then eventually they'll probably get to this when they need more land. But then there are some areas where they have been chopped down, or maybe it's just grassland kind of in between patches of trees, so there's just grass. And then there's this area here where they have started building out a new road network, and you can imagine that there's going to be a new subdivision full of grids here, and they're just going to pack it tightly with houses like we have over in the area on the right of screen. I think this sort of building is going to help solve the problem of how we transition to the edge of the map, because obviously we're not going to be able to build all the way up to the edge of the map as much as I would like to do that. So much of the stuff at the far reaches of the city is basically just going to be forest. So it'd be kind of awkward to just have a dense city go all the way up and then stop abruptly at the edge of the woods. So I'm kind of trying to just gradually shift from one to the other, and hopefully that'll be apparent when we look down at it from the satellite view. So I did all this development while the game was paused, and then I unpaused it, and everyone felt the need to take this one exit to move in. So I recommend if you're building a new residential area, keep the simulation running while you do so. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Todos Santos. I hope you enjoyed your time in the city today, and I can't wait to see you on the next one, where we're going to be doing some more utility stuff. Bye-bye!
que me tardé en contestar.